I love the moment of talking to a business owner who is feeling a little bit battered and bruised, and they've tried to do their best. They've started having conflicting advice, or the thing that they thought would absolutely work is not working anymore, and they're feeling really beat up. And being able to offer them that optimism, that this only stops if you stop. There's that quote around, you only fail if you stop trying, and giving people an ability to do a kind of a risk-based second chance where, I don't sit there and say to them, oh, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. I just give them options where they can at least try again.
Have you got an idea for a business, for a company, for a startup, but you just haven't quite convinced yourself to take the chance yet? Well, if so, then you are in the right place at Leading with Integrity this month. We are talking to solopreneurs, people who have done just that thing. They've found that idea, they've started their business, and they are doing it. And my guest this week offers double value on this subject, because not only is she a solopreneur herself, but is also your startup partner, your business advisor, your business bodyguard, if you will. Her name is Lee Lamb, and she has some great insights to share from her past corporate career, as well as the work that she's been doing for the last 9+ years as partner to startups, advisor to businesses, and consultant on the side as well. So a great conversation ahead. We're going to cover all sorts of things about leadership, organizational cultures, some of the myths and misconceptions of entrepreneurship and leadership as well, and some great advice, great tips, great learnings for anyone looking to or thinking about starting a business.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Lee, welcome back to Leading with Integrity for the second time, but this time an episode about you, not about New Year or Christmas or whatever it was last time. Yeah. So welcome.
Well, thank you for having me back on. It was lovely chatting the first time, so looking forward to it.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, let's kick off really with tell us about you. Tell us about your business, your career so far, why you do what you do.
Oh, wow. So, strapping. My career up until 2016 was very corporate. I worked in investment banks and financial services in the sort of technology areas. Initially, I was quite a techie geek for a while, but then ultimately went into COO, chief of staff roles. Turns out I like organising people, and they liked the fact that I could organise them, so it all worked well. And then in 2016, kind of decided that I probably needed to do something different, partly because of just personal growth within the company. I kind of got to where I was comfortable. I didn't really want to go any further. But there was a few frustrations with how it was working as well. And one of them was kind of how there was a real consultancy era going on, where consultants were brought in, and the frustration usually internally is that the consultancy asks people who work there, hey, what's going on? What's the problem? The people internally tell them what the problem is. And the consultants put together a nice presentation and hang it back to senior management. And they're amazed and they think it's amazing work. And it is. But a lot of it is actually already internal. So it feels very much like, why don't you just listen to people straight away rather than bringing this other group? And so I weirdly thought, I need to be the other group. I need to be kind of on the side of consultancy to better engage with the teams, so that it's not just come in, interview, do the deck, and kind of rinse and repeat, but actually, like, how can you get it so that it empowers the people that you're talking to, and senior leaders really understand the resources they have internally to get some of this stuff done. So that's where I thought I'd be for ages. Wasn't to be. So I ended up, I had some health issues halfway through 2016, which took me out for a few months. So in that time, I was thinking, do I really want to do corporate consulting? Like, is it time to make a bigger change? And so when I started working on my business after the health issues, started going to some startup events and realized that that was a much more interesting area for me to be in. I found it exciting talking to people at the very beginning of that journey, but also that there was quite a massive gap in the advice and the support that they're given. There's a lot of focus on the idea and selling and marketing and generating revenue, not so much on how do you run a business so it lasts longer than like 5 years. So did the shift over and created Your Startup Partner, which is an advisory service for startups who, you know, from the very beginning, an idea on the back of an envelope, don't even know if this really is a business, all the way up to exit and acquisition, Series A, Series B. So I cover the whole gamut and look at it from a strategic point of view. So are we creating a business that is structurally sound, that is living to its values? Does it look like the business that people had in their heads when they thought of creating it? And kind of helping them on that journey. And I've been doing that for, well, nearly 9 years now. So, and I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, 9 years, you wouldn't still be doing it if you didn't, I suspect. That's an interesting. So the bit about the consultants as well. I mean, I agree with that. It's a weird one, isn't it? I feel like a really good consultant, they wouldn't just do that. They would actually teach the leadership how to do it for themselves. And then they would set up the process and they'd leave you with something that you can, you know, sustain it over time. So you don't need to keep paying. I shudder to think how much money to big consulting firms.
Yeah. And I think that therein lies the problem, because the real money in a consultancy business model is the upsell. So, you know, I had a general rule when I had to engage consultants. My general rule was, if you upsell to me, I'll walk you off site, because you're here to solve the issue that we've identified. Work with us on that, demonstrate your values there, demonstrate what you can add to the conversation there. We will happily give you the rest, like happily, but we're not going to do it if you look distracted in doing this piece of work because you're trying to find the next piece. But vast majority of the people that you engage with as the customer, their whole business model relies on them looking for that next piece. And I don't think they really understand how damaging that can be to, you know, it might work with senior leaders, and, you know, they certainly have leaderships who really rely quite heavily on certain consultants or certain consultancies. But it does damage their reputation in other areas, I think, that they're not always aware of.
Yeah, and I think for the leaders themselves, it probably damages their reputations internally as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's a rinse and repeat, right? You find a senior leader comes into an organisation, usually off the back of promoting change. So, you know, there's a big problem, I can come in and solve it for you. The first thing they do is bring in their consultancy, who comes in, asks all the questions, creates the view that could have been got just from talking directly to the people, but, you know, let's not worry about that. They give them the options, they put in their transformation program, their change program, and then in 18 months' time, when either it's hitting blocks because there's some unresolved issues systemically that were just always going to come up as change went in, or perish the thought, the options given for the transformation weren't really the right ones because a big assumptions being made. 18 months into the program is roughly when that happens. And that's usually roughly the career point of senior leaders to move to the next one. And then the next person comes in to fix the problems of the one of the next one. And it's just this recurring cycle. And the larger consultancies for sure are aware that if they can attach to one of these senior leaders, then, they're not just getting one piece of work, they're getting it every time that person moves careers as well.
One of the frustrating things I find with leaders, particularly in those medium to larger size businesses, although I tend to avoid those by design, if I'm honest. It is that sort of that short-term view, because even 18 months, that's not long enough, I think, to properly establish the relationships you need to be effective as a leader. But it's that short-term thinking that to me is the opposite of good leadership. If you're not thinking in like 5-10 years in terms of how you're going to maintain these relationships. And I know, especially in some industries, like the tech industry is one of them, isn't it, where the turnover of people is rapid, and that's normal and it's fine and it works.
Yeah.
I question whether it works once you get to a leadership level, though. Because there's got to be some continuity in an organisation somewhere, hasn't there, if it's going to stay together?
Oh, completely. But I think if enough people are using that same model of 18 months to 2 years rinse and repeat cycle, I think they just are convinced that it's the best way to keep innovative. And it's this distortion of the idea of innovative outweighs creating a legacy. And I always think what it does do is means that you're open to disruption, because people only disrupt when they feel like the value of what's already in the industry has devalued, it's reduced. And it does that if people look at a company and think every company is exactly the same. Financial services has this particular issue, right? Particularly around the investment banks. Sometimes you have to kind of look at the door to remind yourself which company you work for, because they all start feeling so homogenized, because it is literally the same people going round and round and round this carousel, that they all start feeling the same. But what that means is that it then opens up the idea of someone who is fresh and new coming in, then we're not going to do any of that. And, the rise of the challenger banks have shown that actually there is a way to disrupt what should be an absolute legacy sector, but, they've got to earn their stripes again now.
Yeah, that's quite a surprising phenomena to see in a relatively large industry. You see it in smaller cottage industry is probably not the right phrase anymore, is it? But that's the smaller sectors, the niches within other industries, where there is only a finite number of people who know how to do the thing. So, of course, they're all going to rotate around the small number of businesses. But yeah, that's interesting. That's my thing I've learned from this conversation already. And we're only 10 minutes in, so it's good.
We're only 10 minutes in. This bodes well. No, you say 10, 15 years ago, if you say to someone in the industry, what's the difference between working in, Goldman Sachs compared to Deutsche Bank compared to Barclays? They all had a particular flavor. Like it attracted a particular type of person because you knew that environment. But as you look at this homogenization that's happened, it's really difficult to see the difference between them now. And, that doesn't bode well for me, that's an indictment on the leadership, because where's the originality? Where's the original vision is becoming something that's more difficult for them to fathom.
Yeah, another way to look at it is maybe that's just become the proxy for that longevity of leadership that we were talking about, because it's there, just not in the same organisation. But if they're just trading places every now and then, which interesting reference to a film about financial services. But anyway,
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one. So there's another parallel there as well when you're talking about the consultant who's doing the job and but have always got to have their eye on the next bit of work.
Yeah.
I mean, that again, that's a very like small business problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
By necessity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit within there. And, I get it that, I work as a consultant as well. So it's not like I'm saying all consultants are bad. Not really. I'm just saying that when the focus is on that, if you as a small business came in and the second that you started doing your work, started talking to them about pitching for another piece, you would quite rightly be told to focus on what you've been brought in to do, right? And I think we don't give the same latitude to small businesses who are absolutely under that pressure to wing the next bit of business. We almost have to pretend we don't need it or don't want it. So we're like, oh yeah, sure, we're here to do this piece of work, and we're told to kind of frame it as, this isn't the only piece of work, or there's more coming. And when we're in reality, a lot of the times we get a piece of work, it becomes our world for the time that we have it. And then when it's finished, we're like, where's the next bit? Because, we've got that, we haven't got the pipeline that some of the bigger companies will always have.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something I struggle with. And, well, all of those things, in fact. Like, even now, I still have that mindset when I'm proposing new work of, like, it's exactly as you said, like, you've got to, like, make light of it almost. And I know it's the wrong thing to do when I do it, but I still can't help doing it sometimes, where you just, because in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, don't be too desperate for it, because that's going to put you in that negative position, and they'll probably they'll lose interest. And I still don't, it's probably not true either, but I still do it.
I think it's just really difficult depending on the size of the company. So, the SME market is one of the largest components of an economy, and looks like a wealth of opportunity. But the vast majority of SMEs are run not from a position of a business mindset. And by that, I mean, a business mindset is you're investing money in something, and you understand how it's going to make you more money. So, I'm paying for this piece of work to be done because this is going to enable us to add to the revenue line, add to the bottom line. Many SMEs are very much more what I would call a consumer mindset, which is I'm spending money on something, you're costing me something, and is it worth it? And they do this kind of weird comparison between, oh, for that money, I could buy this, and you don't hear that from the larger organizations because they never think of it as their money, right? Because it never is. It's lying on a budget line. Whereas for SMEs, I think it just feels much more of a personal decision. But what that means is that it skews the way that they make a decision. And like you say, instead of being able to say, I can do this piece of work for you, and then I can incorporate this bit as the next piece, and this is how you're going to grow the business on the back of that, you have to constantly justify why they're spending money on you. And that becomes really difficult to win that argument time and time again.
Yeah, I think you're right. And also the smaller businesses are going to be probably way closer to the red than any of those larger ones.
Yeah, exactly. Or certainly not care, because they won't have the credit facilities open to
well,
them.
Yeah, quite. When you think about it, in most economies, I say most economies, I mean, certainly it's true for the UK and probably the US as well. It's over 99% of companies are SMEs.
Yeah.
Which is, when you think about that in terms of like economic policy decisions and things at government level, it's a bit nuts, some of the things that are done.
Crazy.
And how skewed the market and the decision making is towards those less than 0.5% of companies that are the big multinationals. Anyway.
Absolutely is. I noticed it during the pandemic. because I deal with startups. So I think everyone assumed that out of all of the different companies that was going to suffer through a lockdown, that it would be startups that took the brunt of it because, they've not got the resources and not got this. And I would argue it was kind of the other way around, because there was no infrastructure, because they weren't wedded to a particular 10-year plan, they could adapt a lot quicker. What we saw, though, was the bigger companies really struggle with how do we continue to function from home when, we haven't put the things in place that would allow that to happen. And usually to get that kind of flexibility, you're looking at a 3 to 5 year program that would cost us a fortune. And now we're going to have to do it within a couple of days. And, there was a much bigger impact on them. SMEs kind of felt somewhere in the middle, I think.
Yeah. In hindsight, particularly the technology aspect of it and the logistics, I feel like we worried about it more than we needed to. Because, it existed. Zoom was already there. Google Meet was already there. Teams was already there. And failing any of that, if you didn't want to spend money, video calls on WhatsApp was already there.
Yeah.
And
the issue was never technical. It was, and I will bang on about this until somebody pays attention anyway.
I'm paying attention, Lee.
It's line management training. If you don't train people how to line manage, then yes, taking their team away from them physically and putting them somewhere else becomes a problem, not because of the distance, but because you haven't trained people how to manage. So, we see this problem and this drive at the moment to get people back into the office. There's very weak arguments to do so, other than if I can physically see you sitting across a desk from me, I'm going to remember you're there. And it's like, okay, if, presenteeism, it's just about my management requires me to know where you are. Not that you're happy, not that you're performing, not that you've got all the resources that you need to be able to do your job. It's just physically so that I can see you, so I know, how long you're on the phone for. And that's not managing, but it's the culmination of everyone having to try to figure out how to manage because they've not been trained on how to do so.
Yeah, I've said this before. I'm sure I've said it in a conversation with you before. It's one of those things that to me exposed how bad a lot of leaders were, like generally speaking. And I've heard this story time and again of exactly that, like, I need you back in the office where I can see you.
Yeah.
I think a lot of them now, the return to office movement, they've stopped saying things like that now, and it's now being made about, it's the culture and the collaboration and, things like this. And they are, people see that for what it is. It's a thinly veiled excuse, because if you really cared about those things, there's other ways to achieve it. It doesn't have to be.
Exactly. There's one of the arguments I've heard recently is that young people's careers are being affected because they're not around more experienced people, so they can't learn from them.
I've heard
that's
this
absolutely true, but skill does not require you to be in the room. It just doesn't. If you think mentoring is having someone follow you around with a notepad as you just crack on with your job and they just watch you and follow you, that's not mentoring. That's not gaining experience. You can still do it. I think the difficulty again is it's the blind leading the blind in how do I know how to do my job? Because I figured it out because no one told me how to. And what's really infuriating is there's more examples where companies have allowed for the flexibility, and what naturally happens is people identify for themselves, without management getting involved, when would be a valuable time for them to come together with their team and colleagues. And they do it automatically. And they say, hey, you know what? I am going to come into the office a couple of times a week because actually it is really useful if I make sure that I'm in the same day as that person. We can get a load of conversation done that over email would just be a bit cumbersome. And there's value there. that happens naturally. But the second you tell people they have to do it, there's resentment there because it's not based on understanding and giving them, empowering them to be able to figure it out for themselves.
Yeah, it just comes down to trust, doesn't it? I think if you don't trust people to do their job, whether you can see them or not, I don't think that's about where they are. It's about it's about you and your approach to leadership and management, or just some other failing or issue that you need to resolve yourself, or you've got reason not to trust them, which has nothing to do with whether they're remote or in the office. And again, needs to be resolved.
Yeah, and I think the larger companies, about 20 years ago, the conversation about offshoring was, to me, the nail in the coffin of saying that remote working can't work. Because when it was economically efficient to move operations to a cheaper area, cheaper town, cheaper country, and the same question came up, like, how are we going to make sure that the work is done the way that we need it done? They figured it out. So they figured it out when there was a financial incentive to do so. They can figure it out otherwise. But it's this just general laziness when it comes to making sure that people are actually empowered to support their teams by giving them good management training.
Do you not think this is why it's so strange right now, though? Because isn't there a financial incentive to do this now?
You'd think there's a broader financial incentive because many of the larger companies own the real estate. The days of the larger companies renting off somebody else went. Half of Canary Wharf were built by the companies that sit in those towers. They are landlords. They are property owners, and that property has a value only if people use it. So I think a lot of it is, the amount of non-property companies who have ended up with a property portfolio.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, the London example, you would think with the price of real estate in London, they could do better just selling the building.
Oh, completely. I had a conversation during the lockdown. Somebody said to me, co-working like WeWorks and Spaces and all of those, they're going to be dead because no one's going to want to come into the office. And my opinion was, no, they're going to thrive because they're effectively taking the real estate management off companies. So it becomes a cost line on their budget, not this thing that they have to manage and control. And more importantly, it's not an asset that depreciates their P&L. So to me, it made more sense. And what you're seeing more and more in London is a lot of co-working spaces are now, there is a significant amount of corporate people who are told to use that as a secondary office location. So it's like, yeah, I was right. Always good to know.
I mean, it makes sense. It has to make sense. And then there's a cost saving on the actual, like the talent themselves as well. I mean, first of all, if people can remote work, then they don't have to be within a geographical area of whatever your office or wherever it is, do they? Which means you can shop around and you can save a bit of money on salaries potentially. I don't think you should necessarily, but it's possible. Pay for the value that they're giving you, not for where they live. But still, like taking the cynical company owner point of view, something's not adding up for me, I think, in this whole issue. That's the thing I'm not getting. The argument about early career people and learning from the environment they're in, all of that's probably the one I find the most compelling out of all of the various justifications. Yeah. But then again, I think about it a bit longer, and it reminds me of like an old boss I worked for. He used to use words like osmosis and things like that to describe this phenomenon. And even then, that made you cringe just the way he would say it. But
Our word was synergy. Everything was synergy.
Oh God, I hated that one too.
is there any synergy between these teams? Like, no, there isn't.
Yeah. And synergistic, is that even a word?
Yeah,
Probably
exactly.
is now, but it shouldn't have been.
Exactly.
Yeah, buzzword bingo. Used to love that game. It's
Yep.
great fun in meetings until we got caught. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there is something to be said. It depends on the environment you're working in. It probably depends on the industry as well, doesn't it? But I think there is something to be said from working in the same location as people. I think that there is that social aspect as well if you're trying to build a team atmosphere. That is important. I do get that. But I don't think the answer is everyone back to the office 9 to 5 full time. As you said, there's other ways to do it.
I think it centres on empowerment. You can't force people into a situation and then go, but why aren't you happy? So, because they don't want to be here. And I think leaders get really concerned that authority is about telling people to do something and they do it. Right? That's how most people think. I'm a leader because when I say you do something, everyone does it. But they never question why people are doing it. And it's actually the why they're doing it, why they're complying, that tells you whether you're a true leader or not. A true leader doesn't have to send edicts out. They just explain their vision and talk to people about, where would it be useful for you? How can we make this work? Make them sort of part of the solution. But too often we use it as it's almost like it lessens their authority if they ask people for their thoughts, where in reality, the more a leader goes to their teams and says, tell me the best way for you guys to work and I'll facilitate that and we'll do it that way, you get more engagement, more passion, more loyalty and compliance, because they feel like they're part of the conversation. And too often, I think we see it as a weakness when actually it's the biggest strength from a leadership perspective.
No, absolutely. I'm in danger of going off on a rant now, but the language that we use, I think, matters in this context as well. So to me, anyone trying to call themselves a leader who thinks and talks in terms of words like authority or power, even compliance to an extent, isn't a leader and has misunderstood what it means. So, I mean, I totally agree with you. And I think, I'd almost go so far as to say that's not really management either, but at least there it slightly fits better, because that is very much more of a kind of there's a way of doing things, follow these steps, that sort of thing. But
yeah. I think you can train to be a manager. I'm still very much out on whether you can train to be a leader, because I think there are some qualities of leadership that are very specific to your core values, your own personality. I'm sure you've sat in meeting rooms before where you are surrounded by absolute colleagues. Everyone is the same level in the organisation, and a question is asked and all eyes dart to one person who has no actual power or authority, but everyone's like, I'm not gonna, what are they thinking? What are they doing? That's a leader. And when I do, I do work with larger companies for kind of team dynamics, try to help them understand why their teams don't like each other. And one of the things we do is kind of bring a group of people into a room and have them talk. And I'm looking not just at what they're saying, but how they're saying it, like what's the dynamic in the room. And without fail, there will be someone in the room who others are either anxious to say something because they're that authority, right? They're like, can't say anything because that person is going to have an issue with it. Or they look for that person to give permission and guidance. And that has nothing to do with grade or where they are in the reporting line. It's a very much a personal characteristic of them, that people tend to feel like what they say and how they think matters, and that they resonate with what the team as a whole want to get out of working there.
Yeah, I agree. I have experienced that once or twice. Perhaps not as many times as I should have. But for me, the question there is, what led to that? So why is that person perceived as a leadership or an authority rather than the authority about whatever that question was in the room at the time? I think if it's genuine leadership, it's the result of past behaviour, of following those particular values, maybe some personality aspects that lead into that, but ultimately a series of behaviours. And I think those behaviours, that's the bit you can learn about, practice, hone, get better at. It's a difficult one. The context is the real thing, and understanding that. And then there's also the whole thing about the perception of others and how much control anyone really has over that. Not much, I suspect.
Yeah.
But I do believe, I've seen it. It's that result of a longer term pattern of behaviour where they've not just said the right things, they've done the right things, they've lived the values. They've occasionally made mistakes, sure, because everyone does, but they've owned those mistakes, admitted to it, done something about it, and so on and so on. It's that sort of behaviour. And they've dealt with people honestly. They've dealt with them with respect. They've offered trust. They've done all of these good things. And it's not something I think that you can just switch on. And I don't think it's something you're born with or you're not.
Yeah.
It's not like hair, it's, which advert was that? Was it? I shouldn't brand name drop, should I? But we'll edit that out. I'll beep it or something. So I guess it's how do you get to that point is what really interests me.
And I think you're absolutely right. I don't think that leaders are. When I say you can't train a leader, you can't kind of create a leader in that way. It's because they are forged by their behaviour and their past, as opposed to here's the hack. And that this is what annoys me the most, I think, about the way that we perceive a lot of leadership training. Good leadership training identifies the skill sets that the person already has and helps enhance them and bring them out, and in some cases give them permission to use it. For example, empathy is a huge component of leadership. The reason people follow you is because you did step one, which is you understood their position straight away, and that is empathy is not something that you can just switch on or train. There's no set of actions that can demonstrate empathy. You've just got to mean it. And that, in a lot of cases, people do have empathy, but they've been told not to use it, that empathy is a sign of weakness. Or, you can't let people run all over you, and it all only takes a few comments like that to suppress these instincts, which actually are the strongest elements of leadership. Empathy is, I think, a huge one. The other one is interpreting. So what I notice in a lot of the rooms is when you're trying to communicate with a large group of people, not everyone hears it the same way. So you can say something which feels very neutral and objective, and all of a sudden half the room gets very heated because they understand that term or word in a slightly different way. The leaders are very good at seeing both sides, seeing the perspectives, and saying to those people, oh no, I think you're reading it like this, but what they mean is this instead. And so they act as this interpreter, so that when the teams or the people around them are concerned or, have got triggered in some way, they're very good at helping them find a way of explaining the situation that calms them down. And again, that's not a skill that you can learn as a 10-step program. That is the ability to, really tap into your own humanity and think, oh, if I was in their position, this is how I would feel, and this is how I would want it explained to me. And, I think emotional intelligence was starting to get a lot of impact in leadership a few years ago, but you hear less of it now, which is a real disappointing thing.
Yeah, it became a buzzword for a while and people maybe got tired of it. And then I also think possibly the COVID experience had a bit of an impact there as well.
Yeah.
Because it seems to have been less of a thing since then, whereas before then it was all the rage. And I don't really know how maybe it's a coincidence. I don't understand how those two things would have connected. But
I think probably, so emotional intelligence, the way that it was being framed was quite an intellectual exercise, ironically. So we talked about, your increasing your EQ. And what we're really talking about is how do you be human? And the problem is, I think with COVID, it did these two things, which it separated us from society. So we lost the cues that we would normally get from people. So all we had to go on was our own thoughts about what it means to be human in a very overwhelming scenario of who do you listen to, who do you trust. A lot of people experienced an awful lot of loss and not being able to access their usual coping mechanisms of friends and family and social support. So in that instance, what do we do when we're overwhelmed? We pretend it doesn't matter. And that's what I see now. It's like people got so overwhelmed with the emotions that were conjured up that they can't deal with them. So they've just turned them off. And so we've got empathy completely missing in a lot of scenarios now, where you would imagine only 5 or 6 years ago, pre-COVID, those same stories and those same events would have inspired a very different action.
Yeah, I guess it's a question of scale, isn't it? And almost desensitizes people, doesn't it? Yeah. You're probably right. Depressing thought.
I know. I think probably you'll find that there's some kind of, in say 20, 30 years, there'll be some kind of research done on the resonance between, say, for example, people coming back from wars, such as, the First World War, for example, where there was millions of people who were thrust into unimaginable situations. And I think we kind of understood the impact of what they'd been through. So there was a bit more understanding. In comparison, you've got the pandemic, where it wasn't that you were chosen to go to war. You were in the war, whether you liked it or not. And people weren't able to opt out. So they ended up having to go through this experience. And actually, I think there's a lot of similarities in terms of how do you go through something that is haunting and harrowing when you didn't ask for it, and you bottle away those emotions and you pretend you're not having them, and then they come out later, but with varying consequences.
Yeah, it's an interesting parallel. So bringing it back to empathy, I think there is a certain level of that you can practice, you can get better at. Because I think a part of it is about having the mindset and asking that question of yourself. So even like the simple thing like, I wonder how that's made Steve or Jane feel, or whatever. And I think you do that enough times, it starts to become a second nature thing, and you start putting yourself in other people's shoes and you start understanding that a little bit better. Assuming, of course, that you have the capacity to do so in the first place. Of course, there is a certain percentage of the population that won't.
Yeah.
I offer no comment on where that correlates with management level positions.
Probably high correlation, to be honest.
Yeah, but I do think to an extent, I don't know. I'm undecided about this, and I feel like things like empathy and emotional intelligence, that for me, I'm kind of on the fence as to whether they are like a genetic gift that you have or you don't, or that it's something that you can work on and get better at. Because I think I've probably seen both of those in life, in reality, in people.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to call that one.
Yeah, and like I say, I don't think you can teach someone who has no empathy to have it. I think you can help them uncover the empathy that they have. You know, apart from a apparently quite sizable amount of people, but you know, the people who entirely lack the capacity for empathy, everyone else can. But I think it's how much permission you're able to give to show that empathy. You know, for example, if you've ever been on a commuter train in London and you've heard the announcement saying, you know, somebody's jumped in front of a train, so your train's going to be late, there is a shocking lack of empathy. Now, is that because people don't understand that that's somebody's relative? You know, it's actually quite distressing. No, it's the context that they just want to get home, and they are, in a lot of cases, feeling like they're barely holding on and they just need to get home. They just want to be out of this situation, and it's stressful, and it's difficult. Similarly, if again, London commuting is a perfect place to show or not show empathy, because it's like the person who allows someone else to sit down on the train or allows someone else to get on the train before them and kind of holds up the group behind. You know, they're doing it because they're showing empathy for that person. It's like, I'm trying to look after that person. But it's against a wave of everyone else who doesn't want them to do it. And I think we forget that it's very difficult for people to be empathy. I've got this mantra at the moment of, you know, kindness is a form of revolution right now. Just thinking of other people is the way to rebel against what we're seeing. And that's a sad indictment on where we are. But I still maintain optimism that the empathy is still there. We've just got to allow people to unlock it again. So I'm not quite thinking that, you know, the show's over, but we definitely need to do some work.
Yeah, good to know. Yeah, I don't think it's ever happened to me where I've been on the train, but you read about it, don't you? And for me, like the thing that really hits with me empathetically there is for the poor train driver, because imagine what they've had to see and deal with that day. I mean, that's horrible.
Yeah,
it doesn't seem like the sort of job where they should have staff counsellors, but apparently they do.
Yeah, and I can well imagine it, because what you sort of failed to recognise, I think, particularly with the train drivers who are going kind of up and down the up and down the country, is those trains are hurtling along at like what is it now, 140, 160 miles an hour. If a twig hits the rail, it's up to them to sort that out. And I think it is a lot of pressure, and it's just reminding people that we don't know people's contexts and giving people opportunities to explain what those contexts are. And, you know, that's very difficult when everything gets so politicized, where there's this perception that there's a right and wrong in everything. Empathy is about, well, that person made the best decision they did with the information they had at that point. Nobody thinks, screw all those commuters, I'm just going to get in their way. That's not where they're coming from. But at that moment in time, that was the best decision they could come up with. And it may not be the one we come up with, but we've got to understand how to interpret where other people sit, not just our view and only our view.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess another example might be these climate protesters who are sitting down in the roads and things.
Yeah.
You've seen videos on social of that, of people just getting impatient and running them over and all sorts of things.
Yeah. And again, they're not really looking at those protesters thinking, oh my God, I don't believe at all with what you're doing. It's that they're sitting there thinking, if I don't get to work, my boss is going to fire me. Or if I don't get to the hospital, one of my relatives might pass without me saying goodbye to them. I think the difficulty at all with society is that we've all got priorities that will either contradict or directly clash. And it's difficult to address all of those. And it's really the empathy that keeps the structure together, because it allows us to, yes, we might be frustrated at being stuck behind the protest, and, that there's all sorts of implications that they are important. But equally, if they didn't make that kind of moment, if they didn't become that irritant, then the thing that's really important to them also goes missing. And, it's like, just because one calamity is happening at a geological level doesn't mean that it's still not a calamity that we should pay attention to, and recognise that some people feel that that's far more emergency than others.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on the subject of optimism, we've made it to question 1.
Yay! Look at that, onion Aaron.
Yeah. I think we covered a lot of the others anyway. But anyway, this one, yeah. As I say, on the subject of optimism, what's the best thing about what you do?
I think it goes back to that word empowerment. Like, I love the moment of talking to a business owner who is feeling a little bit battered and bruised, and they've tried to do their best. They've started having conflicting advice, or the thing that they thought would absolutely work is not working anymore, and they're feeling really beat up. And being able to offer them that optimism, that, this only stops if you stop. There's that quote around, you only fail if you stop trying, and giving people an ability to do a kind of a risk-based second chance where, I don't sit there and say to them, oh, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. I just give them options where they can at least try again, with some controls in place, with some new strategies to put in place. But I think the most important thing is that they're not doing it on their own anymore. And I think when I'm in a really privileged position where I get to work with people who sometimes that's all they needed. They just needed to know that there was someone else there, that as they were feeling a little bit jittery or a little bit worried about where they were going, there was someone else there going, no, don't worry, you've got this, and I often say, I often describe myself as, a business bodyguard, because, my job isn't to get up on the stage with the founder or the business owner, it's to get them there. And that involves keeping away external threats, but also making sure that they feel able to get up on that stage. And that's a privileged position to be in. And it's lovely to see them get up there and kind of do what they're capable of doing. All they needed was just that one more person to believe in them to get it done. I would say that, that is by far the best feeling of what I do.
Yeah, I think it's particularly for the solopreneurs, the businesses of one. It is quite easy, I think, to feel that isolation, that loneliness, especially during things like COVID.
Yeah, exactly. I was not learning to crochet during COVID.
No, I bet.
I was very, very busy because I had a lot of solo business owners going, what do I do? What do I do? And, I was so thankful that I was able to support them at that time. Yeah. But even not just a solopreneur who's, a company of one, but someone who runs their business, who has a team that they're responsible for, they can't talk to their team about half the things that they need to, because they're carrying the load of making sure that it keeps going. And I think sometimes they because they're that little bit bigger, it can look like they have support when actually they don't, because everyone around them relies on them being the strong one in some way. And that can be a lot.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I was about to say, most business owners, most CEOs, or insert job title here, find it, I think, very easy to kind of feel like and or portray the picture of someone where like the whole business rests on their shoulders. I think for solopreneurs that's literally the case, because there is no one else.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm not sure how that now lines up to what you just said. Maybe there's a third option.
Yeah, maybe. I think that, I think there's a lot of people who, the fact that there's a team there does allow them to give away some of the responsibility, if not the accountability. And, we all know of the people who, it's not me, it's them. And even when they're talking about their own team, it's not me failing as a manager, it's them failing as the team because they're not doing what I told them to do. And, it can, that kind of confidence that, you are, the team have got, it can be misleading. But I think it's understanding that, the way I look at most businesses is, regardless of hierarchy, if you're paying someone a salary, it's because they have a value to the company. That's the only reason we pay people salary, right? Because they have a job that needs to be done. Therefore, they all carry equal worth. One person isn't more important than another. They just do a different job. Now, I think for a CEO, that fits, because a CEO, yes, they're responsible for the ongoing future of the company, but they're still looking at it at a conceptual level and then getting people to deliver on their behalf. It's still symbiotic, to use another buzzword, bingo, but word. When you're dealing with a founder, a lot of the time they are, your point earlier about constantly being near the red, everything does rest on their shoulders. And so they don't necessarily have that same feeling as the CEO does of, oh, well, the team's in it with me. They carry a lot more of the weight, and not just because they want to, but because the team expects it from them as well. They're like, well, this is your company, you tell us. And that can kind of come through a lot. And half the time, it's not even that they need to have somebody with more experience or understanding more different kind of business concepts. It's just having somebody who they can say stuff that's in their head that would spook someone in their team. But actually, once they've said it out loud, they can then go, oh yeah, but we don't need to do that because of this, and this. While it's in their head, it feels like it's an inevitability. Actually, when you start talking about it, other options become available. It's that mechanism that I think is the one that I'm lucky enough to work with my clients, but that we don't always recognise is necessary for business owners.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still of two minds. I feel like a part of that, even with that sort of founder-led business where they're also the owner, being careful now to walk the line and not get myself in trouble. I do think part of that is about how you deal with your people and the way you choose, even sometimes just to vocalize that feeling and that issue. Because there are different routes you can take there. Like, you can just make it out to be like the biggest problem and the greatest weight on your shoulders, and it's it's your cross to bear or whatever, and you can become a bit of a martyr with it.
Yeah,
I find that sort of approach garners zero sympathy with the people you're leading, because ultimately you founded the business. It was your decision. No one forced you to do it. So, there's a problem of your own making. That approach isn't going to get you anywhere.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, you try to stay positive about it, accepting that's not always possible because of the way different people react to different things. But if you can involve your team in sharing some of that burden, and you can talk about these things, you can be vulnerable with them, you can open up a little bit, I think that pays so many dividends later when you're out of trouble, when things are starting to look better.
Yeah,
Might get you there faster as well, frankly.
Yeah, oh, completely. But I don't think you can do it in a vacuum. I
No.
think a lot of companies, there's a lot, particularly as a company is in growth, there's a lot of, I'll deal with that later. I'll put that in place later. And that's one of the things that I try to instill in my clients sort of very early on when they've got nobody working for them. Like, already think about how you want to work with people, because what tends to happen is things like purpose, vision and values and employee engagement get left because everything's about growing the business. And in that context, if you then start being honest about the situation the company's in, it's very difficult for people to have any kind of sympathy, because like you say, they think, well, it's your company and, we've all been wedded to this idea of creating this company, but the only one who really benefits from it is you. So, and you start seeing this dynamic really break down. So, and usually the people who have taken that approach are usually the ones who are also not particularly subtle in the way that they bring up those challenges. They are like, we have to get this invoice paid, or, the lights are off, or, they kind of throw it out as a real threat and then wonder why the team doesn't respond and work a bit harder. It's like, well, you've now told them that their job isn't safe. So be careful. I think if you've done the groundwork, then yes, you can have that conversation with them, because there isn't that huge surprise. They are aware of where the company is. They're aware of what's going on. And you've encouraged them to ask you the questions. We in corporates, we used to do these town halls where you'd have one of the MDs take questions, and I was a big proponent of putting post-it notes instead of putting hands up, because there was always a question that everyone had, but no one was willing to raise their hand and say. But if you gave them the ability to say it anonymously, they would say it. And you always had pushback from the MDs, because they were like, well, they're just going to complain, or they're just going to ask these questions. It's like, the problem isn't that they want to ask the question. The problem is you don't want to answer it. And they know that, and they're using it as confirmation. I think if leaders get more comfortable with the idea that, yes, they're going to ask questions, and it's okay for you not to have a perfect answer. They're not expecting that. They just want to see your reaction when they come up with it. And you go, yeah, actually, that is a problem. I should look into that. Or, oh, well, I understand why you think that, but here's what's happening in the background that you may not be aware of. That's the bit. If you get leaders to do that, then you've got the ability to have a much more open communication with the rest of the company. Very few do it.
Yeah, I mean, it does take a fair bit of courage, I think, especially when there's things like that where everyone already knows there's an issue and you definitely don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But then I also think sometimes there's a bit of willful ignorance there as well, like not wanting to acknowledge that everyone already knows this is a problem, because if you do, then you might have to do something about it.
Oh, yeah, completely. There's very much so if I never allow them to say it, then I don't have to deal with it. Everyone just knows it's going on in the background. Yeah. What happens though is the dynamic within the organization is impacted by that, because you're seen as, well, I'm not going to bring up any problems, because if you won't solve that one, you're not going to solve anything. And then you see this erosion of the culture down to, I'm just here to get paid. And then you've not got anything anyway.
Yeah. And it breaks trust as well, because you look dishonest.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
completely.
And I think, especially in smaller businesses, like, I think, again, I've said this 100 times, but I think any leader or any manager who thinks in a small team that nobody knows the biggest problem in the business already without you telling them, like, you're living in dreamland. Of course they know. And unless you're literally doing, like, so let's say it's like a revenue issue or something, unless you're the only salesperson in the business as well as the founder and the manager and the CEO, somebody else will know. Even then, like, the accounts team will know. Like, it's going to get around, because things like that as well, where the future of the business is at stake, I think, regardless of whatever NDA or confidentiality things you may put in people's contracts, most people, I think, with that, being optimistic about human nature here maybe, but I think most people will feel like it's the right thing to do to let everyone know that their jobs might be at risk, even if the boss hasn't told them that.
Yeah. I mean, in a COO role, you're involved in a lot of those conversations, and there are certainly the method, particularly for things like job cuts, the processes that you have to be seen to be following don't really allow for open communication, because there's always this question over what is an informal, hey, here's a heads up, and what's a formal notice. And also, the behind job cuts, there's a overriding assumption that the company is doing everything possible to not need to do them, right? So, and that has to go up to and including walking into the room to make someone redundant. Like, the emphasis is on, if there is any way to stop that having to happen, you have to be seen to be doing it. So I think for a lot of companies, they err on the side of caution to say, don't say anything, because how can we then prove that we're still trying? If we're saying, a couple of months beforehand, hey, things are looking a bit dodgy, how can we say that we're still trying to save it as they're walking through the door and meet our legal requirements? But I also think that regardless of size of company, people do see what's going on. They kind of understand what's going on. And it's the power of saying, I don't know, or I can't say anything now, but still being prepared to show up and go, even if I have to sit here and say, I don't know that, I can't tell you that hasn't been decided yet, I'm still here, and you're still going to be able to have the opportunity to ask me the question. Because silence is communication. Not saying anything communicates just as much as what you say. So surely it's better to have said something and given people an opportunity to be heard. It can pay dividends in terms of, keeping employees engaged and just kind of making sure that they understand their place in the company. So you don't have to do any repair work later. Because believe it or not, people aren't automatically relieved that, oh, well, out of all of the redundancy round, I was saved. They very rarely are relieved by that. They just think that it's saved for the moment, and they don't feel safe leading out of it, really.
Yeah, especially when half their workmates are gone and whatever. Yeah.
But the work's still there.
Yeah, well, quite same amount of work as well, if not more. Yeah. I guess as with a lot of things, there's levels and degrees of this, aren't there? I think when it's like literally the entire future of the whole business is at risk, where, like, I don't know, pick a number, like in 6 months' time we run out of money. If you're not honest with people about that risk, I mean, as we've said, they probably know anyway. Someone else would have told them, so you've lost your credibility and your appearance of honesty and integrity. But B, it's the right thing to do. And C, if the worst doesn't happen, they will remember that you did the right thing, and therefore they're more likely to stay with you for longer anyway. So this is the bit right. And I understand there's the legalities of it and the redundancy piece and all of that. I do think there's a middle ground there as well, though, where you can talk in more general terms without necessarily hinting specifically like you and your jobs are at risk. You can still have a things aren't great right now, here's what it might mean in the future kind of conversation. But yeah, I've only been through that once, so I'm not an expert.
I think you're right. I think there is a way to have better communication around it, but it starts long before the problems start. If
but nobody's going to do it at that point, though, are they? That's the problem.
Well, it's on the to-do list for later, right? But I think one thing that some of the startups have maybe a better handle of is usually their initial fundraise can be quite a public affair anyway, because of needing to go out, and most companies love the moment where they can announce that, their funding round is complete. And so it's very conscious of how much money the company now has. And if you keep that going, if you keep explaining to people kind of where you are with that and what profit margins you have, and help people understand how their work is tied to that P&L, you stand a better chance of them not getting paranoid about something, but just being able to read it a little bit more carefully. And certainly in a lot of the startups, those first few hires anyway, they're not founders, but they're not employees. They're typically very loyal to the company. They really buy into the vision that the founder's trying to create. They are prepared to take a risk with, being in a company that may or may not exist in a little while. But there is a point at which the next round of people you hire are looking for that stability. They are looking for, that sure sign that everything's going to be fine long term. And it's understanding that those two groups of people are quite different as well, and need a different level of communication.
Yeah, fair enough. It's a tough one. Nobody enjoys going through it. I think I'm always going to err on the side of being honest with people.
Yeah.
And partly because I've seen what happens if you're not.
Yeah, I'm the same. I think that I think some people reading to those difficult decisions that businesses have to make, that you are helping people if you take all of the responsibility. So, the buck stops with you type of mentality. But actually what I've found is if people understand the context, then if they are unfortunately within that group who end up, their roles become untenable going forwards, they don't like it, obviously, but they do understand it. And they do understand what levers have been pulled in order to try to minimize that damage. And I think that goes back to that openness and that honesty. You don't have to shoulder this burden all yourself, because actually it's better if people understand some of the context, so that if it does happen, it's not this huge shock that they thought everything was fine, and then all of a sudden they've got a meeting with HR, and they've got their box handed to them. That is what people fear. And unfortunately, the larger companies don't really stop themselves doing it that way either.
I mean, it's unfair in every direction, isn't it? Like, you're not being, if you're the leader taking all of that burden when that's not necessary, you're not being fair to yourself. And then if you're not giving people that warning and not involving them, you're not being fair to them either. And it's all horrible.
Well, it's counterproductive as well, because what happens if we are not, if as employees we are not given adequate communication, and a lot of the employment law around this is specifically designed for this instance, is when we're not told anything, we are more likely to go into that survival mode of, okay, well, I'm going to raise a grievance, because maybe that's a way to make it more dangerous or difficult to get rid of me. I'm going to contest the redundancy. I'm going to, pull in a number of different people. I'm going to bring in my union. I'm going to bring in all these things. And none of that is because that person wants to be vindictive or aggressive back, but they just feel that this thing has happened to them and all of their personal decision making and personal autonomy is being taken away from them. So of course they're going to fight back. Now, as a founder, that's one of the biggest reasons not to go down that route, to be more open, because you going through a redundancy round as the manager or the founder, although obviously being made redundant is 10 times worse, it isn't a pleasant experience for people to have to deliver. But there are ways of softening the blow for yourself, and that is 100% delivering it in a way that doesn't immediately mean that everything is then a grievance and a complaint and goes legal. That's just making a difficult job even more difficult. And it's easy to avoid if you keep up conversation and communication with people.
Definitely. As the startup partner then, what would you say are the 3 most important things every business owner or founder should do?
Oh, blimey. Okay, so the first one, I think, so I bang on to my clients all the time about their customer journey. So a customer journey is not just I know marketing uses a customer journey as well, but this is like the blueprint of your company. How do people find you, all the way through to how do they find out what you offer? How do they buy from you? How do you deliver the service or the product? How do you keep them in your ecosystem so that they become a repeat buyer from you? All of those things. The amount of people who think that's their business plan is slightly concerning. A business plan is not that. This is a very, very practical walkthrough of what it feels like to interact with your business. And it acts as a blueprint under everything else on your business. If you want to know where to spend money, you should know what it is you need your company to do. If you're using technology, where is the technology being used? If you want to de-risk things, where are the likely risks coming from? So it acts as a blueprint. So I always talk about that. Understanding the inside and outside of your business. So yes, it is very important to sell things, 100%. Generating revenue makes you a company, and that's absolutely a key part of running a business. But you also need the internal operating model to be able to work as well. And certainly I think in the startup world, that's one of the reasons I got involved in it in the first place, because I saw lots of focus on selling and no focus on the bit in the background. And, I've worked with clients who have had their viral moment. So that sales has worked really well and they weren't ready at all for what was coming. So understanding that the connection between what you're selling and then is the inside of the company ready is really important. And then the third thing, I guess, is a reiteration of that, which is how you go out to the world as a brand has to also be linked with what it feels like to work in the company. Again, too often we see brands go out and they have a certain feel, and then you talk to someone who works there and they say, oh yeah, it's not like that at all. And we've got some pretty big examples of that. And we don't realize what an impact that has on the business as a whole. If you want to attract the best talent, if you want your brand to grow, you have to be prepared to understand how your company works internally. What does it feel like to work for you? And does that align with what you're telling the market you're about? Because the first people to notice are your employees, but eventually your customers do as well. That's why we have a customer who will complain because, from their point of view, they get really bad customer service. The person was really really moany and really, wasn't prepared to help me. Well, probably because the way that you think the company works and the way that the employee thinks it works are two very different things. And eventually it comes out to the customer. So that tie is super important.
It's not always a cynical or malicious thing, but it can be, I suppose. But I think part of why that feels so wrong from the employee's perspective is that you're making them feel dishonest. Yeah. Like they're being forced to present this false picture of something that doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to all the things we talked about, doesn't it? And culture and leadership and values, etc. It all joins together eventually.
Yeah, completely. I did some retail jobs when I was younger, and it was at a time where producing excellent customer service was a real focus for retail. And I'm not saying it's not now, but it's definitely changed. We were given training, even as Saturday staff, we were given training on customer service, and we had a really good relationship with our bosses in that they were confident that how we had dealt with a customer was how they trained us to deal with it. So if the customer says, I want to talk to your manager, you felt supported because the manager was able to say, I know how they would have responded to your query. I know that they've done the right thing. And as a member of staff, that's all you want, and I think I've seen such good examples of that I spot it when that doesn't happen, when a member of staff is saying something, but they've got no faith that their manager's going to back them up. And they're just like, yeah, this could be the end of me. And it's sad because it makes it such a bad experience to working. And then it has the impact of telling customers what your business is really like. It's such a no-brainer to not do it.
Yeah, it doesn't feel great for the customer either, I would expect. Yeah. Unless they're the ones who are running people over and complaining about train drivers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay. I think this is going to be potentially the most difficult question I ask you today.
Oh, go on.
We'll see. If you could go back in time, how far back in your own life would you go, and what would you say to your younger self?
Oh, blimey. I'd probably go back to my early 20s because I went to university and did a law degree, fully expecting to go into law and then not going into law. And there was a period of time where it was like, wow, I've put all this time and effort into doing something, and I'm not going to get the job that I thought I was going to. And the reason I go back to that time is because when I look back now, it was the time where I had the best evidence that having knowledge, having experiences, you may think that they only have one application, but actually that ability to transfer those skills is huge. And on a daily basis, I'm really grateful for the fact that I had the legal training, because there's so many elements that don't even come into, it doesn't appear to be a legal question, but I know that I'm answering it from a legal standpoint, like our conversation around redundancies, right? I went straight into, here's what the law is. And I think at the time I saw it as a real failure of I didn't go into the thing that I'd been working so hard to do. But actually I've come out with something that's far more rewarding. So yeah, I'd probably do that one.
Yeah, I think I probably had the opposite experience in my university. I never intended to do it, and then I didn't.
Yeah.
But it was sort of vaguely interesting for 3 or 4 years, so it's okay, I suppose.
Yeah, I realised eventually that the thing that appealed to me about going into law was because I made the decision when I was like 14, and I was very much, it wasn't about the law at all. It was the fact that people argued for a living. I was like, that sounds amazing. That sounds nice. Great. Because I like what I realise is I like looking at a situation and figuring out other alternative meanings or alternative interpretations. And much to my parents' distress, if they had an opinion, I almost always went, yeah, but, and came up with the opposite. It makes it really good at what I do now, because I talk to a lot of founders who are trying to be disruptive and break the status quo. And it really helps to have that kind of slightly argumentative approach to be, yeah, but what if things didn't work like that? What if we didn't have to do it that way? What is those alternatives? And I think that's why I can sit with founders in their space and we can get energized, because I'm creating that kind of almost legal argument as to why it's important for this thing to be broken up so that we can do things better.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think, doesn't everyone do that to their parents though, especially in the teenage years? I
would have thought so. I
probably still do it now.
I know that I was very annoying, like really annoying. I have to apologise to them on a regular basis.
Yeah, sorry, Mum.
Yeah.
My main listener, yeah. She's listening, I'm sure. Anyway.
Leadership Heroes.
Well, one question left for you, Lee.
Go on.
It's my favourite one, though. Mm-hmm. It's called Leadership Heroes. Mm-hmm. So if you could pick one person, but literally anyone you could think of, alive or dead, past or present, real or even fictitious, those are always fun. But someone who, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership, who would that be for you and why?
Okay, so I am going to... There's a risk of sounding like fangirling, and it's not at all. But I think when I look at all the components, one of the people that embodies it for me is Richard Branson. And it's not for the reason that everyone else thinks. It's what he does very well is he understands that his brain allows him to think of lots of different things at the same time. So that entrepreneur in him, you know, you have to ride with it. It's not going to go anywhere. It's always going to kick up. But then he also recognizes his limitations. So if you look at the growth of the Virgin Group, he knew nothing about running an airline, but he knew that the way that it was working at the moment wasn't working for people. So he was okay at bringing in someone who did know about airlines and saying to them, I've noticed these problems and I think we solve them like this. What do you think? So he embodies leadership for me because it's about the ability to recognize your limitations, and you're pulling people in to use their experience and empowering them to do that. And then he very much goes into almost like servant leader. You know, he's ended up in all of those hot air balloons primarily because he's like, that's what I can do. You know, when Virgin Atlantic launched, he was like, I can't fly a plane, but I can go up in a hot air balloon and I'll get eyes on us. And it was always about what can I do to amplify the work that my team is doing. And I always find when you hear him talk, he's much more aligned with, this isn't just about me. This has always been a group effort. And I think that embodies, whether what ultimately happens in the Virgin Group, is, you know, a perfect business. I don't think it is, but in terms of his approach to leadership, I think he's a really good example of someone who recognizes the power of empowering others.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a good choice. I think he has been picked before at least once.
He is a pretty obvious choice. That's why I was saying.
Have to check it. Yeah.
When I was thinking about it, I was like, it really is him, but for slightly different reasons than I think most people would do.
Yeah, and I think your reasons are good. I like the why there. And I think in his, is it fair to say his later life? Yeah, it probably is. He's a bit old now, isn't he? So he's doing other things now where he's going a step further and giving back, isn't he? Like he's sharing his knowledge, he's doing the newsletters and the things like that. And maybe cynically there's some money at the end of the path there and that's why he's doing it, but also he doesn't have to do it.
Yeah, there's a lot of freedom that comes from not having to do something. And, he certainly lived a very good life, and having an island to escape to all the time can't be a bad thing. But I'm always I'm a Virgin Startup mentor, and they hold a number of events, and occasionally either Richard Branson or Holly Branson kind of come into the conversation. And I'm just always conscious that they still talk like entrepreneurs. Like he talks about the journey of running those businesses and the thrill that comes from it. And he can still attach to that. So to me, that shows it's a core value. It's a core piece of who he is. Whereas absolutely no names at this point, because I do not want to be sued. But there are other examples where it's clearly more about the money and the status and the success that comes off the thrill of the ride, that kind of matters more. And you can see the difference in kind of loyalty to those companies as well.
Yeah, I think so. I could guess who you're talking about, but I don't want to get sued either. So.
Yeah. Let's keep out of any more legal entanglements.
Absolutely. Well, now I know you've got a law degree, maybe it's worth the risk. Anyway, well, Lee, it's been such a great conversation, as evidenced by the duration that doesn't feel anywhere like an hour and a half now. So thank you for being with us again. Thanks for coming back. Really enjoyed all of this. And last smallish question. If anyone wants to learn more about you, if anyone needs help with their startup, where can they go to learn more things?
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me and, having another place to air some of my opinions. I am predominantly on 3 areas. I have my LinkedIn profile. Just look for Lee Lamb. Somehow I am the Lee Lamb on LinkedIn. Don't know how I got that. But you've also got the Your Startup Partner website, yourstartuppartner.com, and also my subscriber platform where I offer advice and support for early stage startups on advisorinyourpocket.com.
Lovely. I'll put those links down there below somewhere in the place where people look.
Fantastic.
Excellent. Well, that's much more than we've got time for. So thank you again. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Lee, thank you again so much for your time. Great conversation. Always a pleasure talking to you. So thanks again for coming back onto Leading with Integrity for the second time. Listener or viewer, as always, if you would like to learn more about this week's guest, and I do encourage you to do so, click on one of those links down in the episode description. Visit her website, reach out to Lee on LinkedIn as well. I know that she would love to hear from you. And if you're looking for leadership support, I'm here to help with that as well. Your first port of call should be www.leadingwithintegrity.co.uk. On there you will find some resources, articles, a Leadership Heroes quiz as well. You can register for my next Leadership Values event as well, which is always a bit of fun. And there will also be a green button that's sprinkled around the website at various places where you can come and join the Integrity Leaders online community for new leaders, first-time managers, or founders of businesses. If leadership is something you want to learn more about, it's something you're struggling with, if getting the best from your people is a challenge for you right now, then that is the place to be. And as always, my LinkedIn profile link is in there as well. If you have any questions about any of these things, or you just want to have a chat about this episode or any of the others, do connect with me. Do drop me a message. Always happy to talk leadership. That's all we've got for you for today. Thank you for being with us. I hope you'll be back again next week when I'll be talking to my next solopreneur guest, the very excellent Mr. Daniel Moore. And until then, be a leader, not a boss.